Hi and welcome to this video on if-else statements and the Python in collection feature, all of which are parts of the larger topic of condition and selection in programming. So the purpose of this video is to cover the theory and related learning of concepts such as condition, selection and sequencing, all of which are related to the notion of an algorithm, to explain how to use Python if, elif, else statements to test a condition and to make an appropriate selection, and also to remind you about something we've seen in a previous video, which is the Python in collection feature to test a condition and to make a selection. We can use that feature as well. As usual guys, the Python Monster resources are there for you to supplement your learning from the classroom. So that's the booklets and the videos. You may also find those useful for your revision as well. Okay, so in this video on if-else statements and of course condition and selection in general, we're touching on an area of programming that has quite a lot of theory and related course learning. So for example, using flowcharts, being able to interpret flowcharts, okay, some formal definitions like sequencing. So what I've done is I've put all of the theory, okay, all of the theory and related learning up front in these slides to make it easier for you to separate the video, okay, into a front end theory part and a back end programming part, okay, with the programming demos. I'll also revisit these slides briefly with screenshots in the code examples, okay, just so that you can relate one to the other. So before we start looking at flowchart representation of condition and selection, which of course we often end up coding using if-else statements, let's look at the significance of sequencing. So on this slide you will see some concepts that you need to know for your GCSE guys. Okay, an algorithm, as you all know, is a series of logical steps or instructions. Algorithms become computer programs when they are written in a language that can be translated into binary, because that's the language and the only language that the computer understands. Now the sequencing of code means that the code caters for different conditions that will be evaluated as true or false, just as you are used to seeing in a flowchart. If that's correct, then different paths in the code can be followed correctly. So it's also important to avoid what we call redundant code. So redundant code is code that's never actioned because a condition never leads to that code being run. Okay, so flowcharts, as you know, are a very good way to show in a visual form an algorithm with condition, selection and sequencing all on display. So the code for this simple flowchart is one of the Python demos that I'll be doing a little bit later on, but you can see that we test for a condition as true or false. So that's the diamond with the yes and the no, and we're asking the question, is the name John? Yes equates to true, which is a Boolean data type, as you know, and no equates to false, which is also a Boolean data type. So in terms of selection, however, in this example, only one selection has consequence, because if the condition is false, the selection has nothing in the flowchart, so nothing is actioned and it just drops down to stop at the bottom. So we will also look at how we use an if-else statement to cater for two selections with consequence, and you can see that on the slide where I have improved the previous flowchart. You can see the amended flowchart on the slide where this time something happens when the condition is the name John is evaluated as evaluated as either true or false. Okay, but both of those conditions are catered for where something is happening. On this slide you can see how we express multiple conditions and selections. There are three in this case. So this is an example that you'll see a coded solution for later on in the video, and we will be using the if, elif, else statement, okay, to put this flowchart into a coded solution. So in this example, the user can make three choices of club membership: bronze, silver and gold. We need to be able to cater for any of those three choices, and we also need to be catering for a default or a catch-all choice where perhaps the user puts in an invalid choice, okay, neither bronze, silver or gold. Now just as a related aside guys, I use a web-based flowcharting tool that's free to use. It's called lucidchart.com. So in an exam, of course, you're not expected to produce pristine flowcharts, but for coursework, okay, or work in the classroom, Lucidchart is really easy to use, and it's a great source for screenshots which you can take to support your work. Okay, so let's do some Python demos that specifically relate to the flowcharts that you've seen in the theory part of the video. Okay, so let's do the code equivalent of the very first flowchart that you saw in the theory part of the video earlier on. So here's a reminder of the flowchart that we're going to be coding. Pause the video if you wish. It's a very simple flowchart example, and the code is going to be quite simple as well. And if you remember, the key thing about that flowchart was that there is only one consequence of one condition. So the only thing that we are catering for in that flowchart is if the condition is evaluated as true. Okay, so let's do the code. Let's make this a little bit bigger for you. I'm going to put in a comment which says, for example, simple if statement using string data types. I am going to make a little bit of a deal of string data types, certainly in this part of the video, because in the related video where we were looking at comparison operators, I spent a lot of time on number data types. So I'm going to spend some time excuse me, using, of course, comparison operators on string data types in this video, because we are using comparison operators as part of testing for true and false. So let's grab a variable and let's get some input from the user. So user input equals, and then we want input function and the prompt, please input your first name. Let's just move this over a little bit and just zoom out a little bit as well. 2 arrows and a space. And then I'm going to put in the if statement, and I will explain the syntax to you in a second. Okay, so let me just get this down. So if user input. Now, are we going to get away with a 1 equal sign? I think not, because if you remember from the list of comparison operators, when we are comparing equality, in other words, when we're asking the question, is this equal to something else, we have to use double equal signs, okay, because we're not assigning a value to a variable, we're comparing equality. Okay, so if user input equals, and then we want John, okay, just like the flowchart, and then we want to say print something to the screen, so hi John, but also I'm going to put another line of code in just above that to say selected. Okay, let's get the brackets the right way around. Selected because this is true. This will help us a little bit later on. Okay. All right, let me just run that before I do anything else to make sure it works. Okay, so just going to move this over. Okay, input your first name. Okay, I'm going to put input John. Okay, and it says selected because this is true. Hi John. Okay, so this is an example of where we are using a single if statement, because that was all that was required in the flowchart, a single if statement. Okay, so let's just focus on this single block of code here, which is catering for the user input being evaluated as true. So the first thing that you will notice, let's just make this a little bit bigger. Hopefully, there we go. So the first thing that you will notice, if you've not seen this before, is that we always have a colon on the end of an if statement. Okay, we always have a colon followed by indentation. That thing which drives everybody slightly loopy until they get fluent in Python, and it drives all of us slightly loopy at some point or other, guys. Okay, even those of us that have been programming for many years. So we put an indentation in. An indentation basically means a space away from the margin, and in the case of Python it's 4 spaces, and most people will use their tab key to push those lines of code out away from the margin on the left hand side. Okay, I'll just show you that. So if I want to put another line of code in, let's go right back towards the margin. okay, I do the tab key, so it pushes out 4 spaces, and then I can put, okay, my whatever line of code I want in. That makes sure that it's included in the entire block of code, okay, which is all part and parcel of this evaluation and sequencing of a response. Okay, let's move that out a little bit. Okay, so in the amended, slightly improved flowchart, where we were catering for yes, the name is John, and no, the name isn't John, so for catering for a true or false scenario. Okay, I'll just put that flowchart up for you. Okay, so what we need to do to cater for the possibility of either a true or a false, we need to put in an else statement. So I'm going to put in an else followed by the colon, and then just as before we put in indentation. I'm going to print, okay, selected because this is false, and then I'm going to put okay, you are not John. Okay. Let's just zoom out a little bit so you can see the whole of that block of code, and let's run it to make sure that it works okay. So I'm going to do what I did before. I'm going to put in John, which will be evaluated as true, and it says selected because this is true. Hi John, just as before. Now I'm going to run the code, and I'm going to deliberately put in a name that's not John. So let's put in Pete or Peter. Okay, and it says selected because this is false. Okay, you're not John. Okay, so what's actually happening here is that the colon and the indentation together are helping Python to know where the condition, the evaluation and the sequencing of the code starts and stops. Okay, so the indentation, you can see this is nice and neatly organized so that Python can see the colon, the indentation, another colon, indentation. It's helping Python to manage the sequencing of your code. Okay, now I'm just going to put in another line of code, okay, to show you how important indentation is. So I'm going to put here print the condition and selection is finished. And if you'll notice, guys, here there's no indentation. Okay, so it just goes right up against the margin, which is what you're normally used to seeing. So let's run the code now and see what we get. And I'm going to do the same as I did before. Okay, we're going to put in John and then some other name. So let's put in John, and it says selected because this is true. Hi John, and then it says the condition and selection is finished. Okay, so that's this line of code here. Okay, let me now put in a name which is going to be evaluated as false. Okay, so input your first name, and I'm going to put in Pete or Peter, doesn't really matter. It says selected because this is false. Okay, you are not John, and it says the condition and selection is finished. So you can see, regardless of how the sequencing in this block of code is managed here, doesn't really matter, because the print statement at the bottom, where it says the condition and selection, is outside the block of code, and that's because the indentation is up against the left-hand margin, or in other words, there's no indentation. Now watch what happens if I make a mistake, which is very easy to do, and I just put this in the wrong place here. So I'm going to indent it by mistake. So now let's run the code and see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to put in John, and you can see now that this line of code doesn't get actioned, it doesn't run. Okay, if I now change this and put in another name apart from John, so let's put in Pete as I've done before, you can see now that line of code actually appears, and the reason for that is because the indentation is telling Python that this line of code should be treated, okay, along with the lines of code which are part of our else statement. So in other words, that line of code will only appear just like where it says okay, you are not John, okay, because of the indentation. So it's very, very easy in Python, just by forgetting to put indentation in, for your code to actually work incorrectly. So indentation is a pain, but it also needs to be treated very sensitively as well, guys, because it can constitute a lot of searching in your code for something that doesn't quite work properly. Okay, so let's put up the last of the flowcharts that you saw in the theory part of the PowerPoint. This is a flowchart for multiple selections. So let's put that up now. Again, you can freeze the video if you want to. Okay guys, so let's write the code that represents that flowchart. So I'm going to put in a little bit of a upfront narrative to explain what this does. So for multiple selections, let's say the user has a choice of 3 memberships. Okay, bronze, silver and gold, all of which have an associated cost. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try and use some of the learning which we addressed in some of the previous videos. So I'm going to deliberately use constants. So I'm going to put constants here. Okay, I'm going to assign to constants the cost of each of those memberships because they're not going to change in our program. Okay, so in capital letters, because that's the preferred way of defining constants, with capital letters. So bronze was £25. Convention was the word I was looking for. Yeah, so that's the preferred convention. Capitals for constants. So bronze equals £25. Silver was £35. Okay, so these are all float data types. Gold was £50. Okay, and that should do us for the constants. Let's get some input from the user. So we'll call it membership. So I'm using a really sensible variable name. Membership equals, then we want input, and followed by our prompt. And we're going to say, please input your choice of membership. Now guys, this is going to be quite a long prompt. Okay, so what you can do in Python is if you just hit the enter key at an appropriate point, okay, it will allow you to drop down to the next line without causing a syntax error. So let's put in either, okay, bronze, silver or gold. Okay, space, arrows, space, there we go. Okay, so now we're going to construct our if and elif and else statement. All of this will become clear once I've written it, and I will go through it and explain it, which is the syntax and format we need to cater for multiple selections. Okay, so we start off as we normally would. So if membership equates to bronze, okay, then colon as before guys, indentation, print a consequence, a message of consequence. So bronze costs, and then we want the pound sign. Okay, it's just so that we're doing a little bit of basic formatting. And then because I have used float data types up here, okay, I'm going to need to cast those to strings so that we can concatenate, guys, which you will have seen, I think, in virtually every video I've done previously, always getting an opportunity to do some casting. Okay, so we're going to have to cast those to string data type. So I want str open bracket, okay, and then I want the constant bronze. Okay, and I have forgotten the plus, which I do on a regular basis for concatenation. There we go. Okay, so that's the only thing that we need to do to cater for bronze, is to print out the cost of bronze. So what I need to do now is I need to say else if, okay, and the way of saying that in Python is to do the shortened form of else if, which is elif. So it becomes elif, okay, and then same as before, membership equates to silver, okay, then we want a colon at the end, and then we want almost exactly the same as before. So I'm going to cheat and I'm going to copy this so I can paste it directly in, and then I'm just going to tweak it. So this becomes silver, okay, and then we want to change the constant obviously from bronze to silver, okay, and then we want another elif, okay, so elif membership equates to gold. Again, we want the colon at the end. I'm going to paste in what was on the clipboard, so this becomes gold costs, and then we want to swap the constant for the value associated with the gold constant. Okay, now if you remember from the flowchart and from the narrative a little bit earlier on, I said that we really want to cater for some default or catch-all if the user doesn't choose any of those by mistake. So that will become else. So in other words, this is the last condition to be evaluated, really, else. So if all else fails, you can say there, membership, no, we don't want membership, we just want to print out a message, don't we? So print, sorry, your input is invalid. Okay, so just before we run this, then we've got our input from the user. Our block of conditional code, if you like, is now all of this. Okay, we've got nice neat colons and indentation. Okay, colon, indentation, colon, indentation. Okay, and colon, indentation. Okay, so as I said before, the colon and the indentation enable Python to be able to sequence your code correctly, and in this case it's got to cater for if the first condition is correct, followed by all the other alternatives which are captured by the word elif. We could have a whole raft of those, by the way, guys. We could have 5, 10, 15 elifs depending on choices. Okay, followed by, right at the very end, okay, the desperate if all else fails, which is the else at the bottom. Okay, if all else fails at the bottom, okay, sorry, your input is invalid. Okay, so let's just run this and make sure it works. I'm going to move this over as I always do. Okay, let's make this a little bit bigger. So let's run this. Okay, so it says, I'm going to have to move this over quite a bit, aren't I? Please input your choice of membership, either bronze, silver or gold. So let's put in bronze. Okay, it says bronze costs £25. Okay, we haven't really got the ideal decimal formatting here, guys, because it's just got the 0.0 instead of 0.00, but I'm not going to worry about that in this video. We'll do some string formatting in a future video. Okay, so not too worried about that. Let's run it again, and let's put in another choice this time. So let's go in sequence, and let's do silver this time. So I'm going to put in silver. Okay, so silver. And it says silver costs £35. Okay, a couple more then. Let's do gold. Okay, so gold costs £50. And then of course we said that we would cater for an invalid input. So let's do that then. So let's put in wood, okay, because I really don't have too much money for membership at the moment. And it says, sorry, your input is invalid. Okay, so wooden membership doesn't work. Okay guys, so all of that works fine. Just to summarize then, when we have multiple selections, then we need to use 3 different types of statement to make that work. We have the if statement, which evaluates the first possible condition, okay, followed by all the other alternatives, and all the other alternatives, okay, are given the keyword elif, which stands for else if, okay, and finally, if all else fails, we have that sort of catch-all at the bottom, or the default, which says sorry, okay, none of those conditions have worked, so it must mean that you've put in an invalid input to some degree or the other. Okay guys, before we leave this video, I promised that I would revisit the Python in collection feature, so let's do that now. So I'm going to put in here an example of using the Python. Well, I should be able to spell Python correctly by now. An example of using the Python, and then we want in collection feature. Okay, so I'll just get this down, and then you'll probably see how it works because you will have seen it before, but I will go through it very briefly. So we want some user input. So let's say user fruit equals inputs followed by the prompt. So we want please input your favorite fruit. Okay, space, arrows, space. Okay, then we're going to say if user fruit. Now normally we would say equals or equates to, but in this case I'm going to say in, and then we want the collection that we're going to ask Python to check against to see if it is in that collection. Okay, so our collection is open brackets, and then we want members of the collection. So orange, these are all fruits obviously guys, apple. Okay, and then I'm going to put pear. These are all string data types, so they need the single quotes on either side, and then just to be controversial I'm going to put in lemon. Okay, so we want the colon, and then we have our indentation print. Then we want a meaningful sentence, so I'm going to say the and then the user fruit, so concatenated with the user fruit plus, and then is one of my favorite fruits too. Let's just move it over guys so you can see it. So obviously I am providing a suitable response for a true evaluation. Okay, so the user's fruit is in the list that Python is looking at. Okay, so the user fruit is one of my favorite fruits too. Okay, else. Okay, what happens if it's not in that list or not in that collection? Print. And then we'll say okay, not too keen on the, and then we'll concatenate that with the user fruit again. So we're dealing with strings again all the time. By the way guys, I don't think I'm going to have time in this video because it's becoming a long video, so I'm not going to have time to look at number data types, but I will do that in the examples of more complex if statements in the next video. Okay, so I will go back to number data types. So that's it. So let's run this and see what happens. Let's move this over. Okay, so please input your favorite fruit. So I'm going to put orange. Okay, orange is in the collection that Python is evaluating against. Okay, true, it has found an orange in the list, so it says orange is one of my favorites too, or my favorite fruits too. Let's put in an input which is not in the list of 4. Okay, so let's run it again. And I'm going to put in grapefruit. Okay, and it says, not too keen on the grapefruit. Okay, so you've seen this before. I mean, essentially we are using, in terms of the if-else structures, we're using a simple if-else structure or block of code. But within that, we're using this really nice feature, which is the Python in collection feature, where Python will evaluate true or false if it finds one value, one data value, in a collection of other data values. Okay, if it finds it, it evaluates this as true. If it's not in the collection, it evaluates it as false. And you can see that working there with the examples that we put in. Okay guys, that brings me to the end of this video. We have done code examples of all of the flowcharts that you saw in the theory and initial learning part of the video. We've looked at some key programming theory and concepts such as the algorithm, sequencing, condition and selection. And in the next video we will look at some nested if-else statements, so we will take it to the next step further. Okay guys, see you in the next video.